In the gaslit heart of 1888 London, a city stalked by shadows and secrets, debutantes competed for one prize, a ducal coronet. But for Miss Victory Ainsworth, the season's most coveted prize was freedom. He was Alistair Beaumont, the Duke of Blackwood, a man whose name was a whisper of immense power and chilling tragedy. They called him the Beast of Blackwood, a recluse haunted by a past as dark and rugged as his castle on the Cornish coast. He could have any woman in England, yet he found himself utterly captivated by the one who met his gaze not with fawning admiration, but with fiery defiance. This is not a fairy tale. It is a story of what happens when the most powerful man in London decides he wants the only woman he can't have, igniting a passion that could either be their salvation or their ruin. The London season of 1888 was a gilded battlefield, and Miss Victory Ainsworth was its most unwilling combatant. At 20 years old, she possessed a beauty that was both a blessing and a curse in a society that valued women as ornamental assets. Her hair, the color of rich mahogany, was piled atop her head in the fashionable style, but rebellious curls escaped to frame a face that was too intelligent, too expressive for the placid mask worn by her peers. Her eyes, a startling shade of stormy gray, missed nothing and revealed everything, especially her profound disdain for the spectacle unfolding around her. Tonight, the grand ballroom of Bridgewater House, the London residence of the Earl of Ellesmere, was a kaleidoscope of shimmering silks and flashing jewels. The air, heavy with the scent of imported lilies and French perfume, buzzed with the practiced murmur of high society. Victory stood beside her aunt, Lady Beatrice Ainsworth, a woman whose own marital disappointments had only sharpened her ambition for her niece. "You must at least pretend to be interested, Victory," Lady Beatrice hissed, her fan fluttering like a trapped bird. "Every eligible gentleman of consequence is here. Lord Ashworth has been looking this way for 10 minutes. Victory didn't bother to look. Then Lord Ashworth is a master of patience. Perhaps he should take up angling. "Do not be impertinent. This is your second season. People will begin to talk." "Let them," Victory murmured, her gaze sweeping the room. It was a veritable sea of sameness. Young women with identical pastel gowns and forced smiles, and men whose worth was measured in titles and acreage. They were all playing a game whose rules she refused to learn. Her heart, a secret she guarded fiercely, belonged to another. Mr. Thomas Finch, a gifted artist with paint-stained fingers, and a soul that saw the world not in terms of possessions, but of light and color. He was penniless, untitled, and utterly unsuitable. He was everything she wanted. "Good heavens," Lady Beatrice gasped, her grip tightening on Victory's arm. "He is here." Following her aunt's awestruck gaze, Victory looked toward the arched entryway. A hush fell over the surrounding conversations, a ripple of collective awe and fear. Framed by the marble columns stood a man who seemed to absorb the light around him. He was tall, dressed in immaculate, severe black that made the other men's finery look garish. His dark hair was brushed back from a pale, aristocratic face, and his features were so perfectly sculpted they might have been carved from ice. It was Alistair Beaumont, the Duke of Blackwood. Whispers followed him like a shroud. The Duke was a figure of Gothic legend. Immensely wealthy, impossibly powerful, and rarely seen, he was the last of a storied and tragic line. His parents' demise years ago was a scandal that the Ton still spoke of in hushed, fearful tones. Since then, he had remained largely secluded in his ancestral fortress in Cornwall, Blackwood Manor, a place rumored to be as haunted as its master. "The Beast of Blackwood," Victory whispered, the moniker tasting of dark fascination on her tongue. "Victory," her aunt admonished. "He is the most sought-after man in England. A single word from him could elevate a family for generations." "He looks more likely to devour them," she countered, though she could not tear her eyes away. He wasn't observing the party, he was dissecting it. His gaze, a piercing, intelligent gold, swept the room with an air of profound boredom until it landed, with unnerving precision, on her. For a moment, the noise of the ballroom faded. Victory felt pinned by that stare, stripped bare of her silks and her societal obligations. It was as if he saw not just the defiant debutante, but the restless spirit trapped within. She met his gaze without flinching, a silent challenge passing between them across the crowded room. A flicker of something, surprise perhaps, or intrigue, registered in his otherwise impassive expression. He broke the contact first, turning his attention to his host. But the encounter left Victory with a disquieting chill. Later, seeking refuge from the oppressive heat on a stone balcony overlooking the Green Park, she found herself no longer alone. "Enjoying the view, Miss Ainsworth?" The voice was deep, a low rumble that vibrated through the cool night air. She turned. The Duke of Blackwood stood there, a silhouette against the gaslight of the ballroom. "I find it preferable to the one within, Your Grace." A corner of his mouth lifted in a semblance of a smile. "I confess I share the sentiment, though I find myself suddenly reconsidering." His eyes roamed her face, bold and assessing. "You are Miss Victory Ainsworth. You have refused to dance with Lord Ashworth, Viscount Pemberley, and the fourth son of the Marquis of Queensberry?" Victory's composure wavered. "You have been watching me." "It is impossible not to," he replied, his voice softening almost imperceptibly. "You are a splash of color in a watercolor world. Tell me, Miss Ainsworth, why are you here when it is clear you would rather be anywhere else?" "My presence is not by choice, Your Grace," she said, her honesty a weapon. "It is a duty I am compelled to perform. And you resent it." It was not a question. "You resent the cage, however gilded." She was taken aback by his perception. "I value freedom above all else." "Freedom," he mused, stepping closer. She could smell the cold night air on his coat and a faint masculine scent of bergamot and leather. "A noble sentiment, but freedom, Miss Ainsworth, is the most expensive commodity of all, and it is rarely purchased without sacrifice." Before she could form a reply, he took her gloved hand. His touch was firm, sending a jolt of unexpected warmth through her. He raised it not to his lips, but merely held it for a beat, his golden eyes searching hers. "You have made this dreary affair interesting," he said softly. Then with a curt nod, he was gone, melting back into the glittering throng, leaving Victory with a wildly beating heart and the terrifying premonition that her carefully guarded world was about to be irrevocably shattered. The Beast of Blackwood had noticed her, and she feared he was a creature that did not easily let go of what caught his eye. The morning after the ball at Bridgewater House, a footman delivered a small, unassuming box to the Ainsworth residence in Mayfair. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, was not a bouquet of roses or a gaudy jewel, but a single perfectly preserved raven's feather, its obsidian surface shimmering with iridescent blues and purples. Attached was a simple card, bearing the Duke of Blackwood's crest and a single elegantly penned word, "Freedom." Victory stared at it, a shiver tracing its way down her spine. It was a message, a challenge, a sign that he had not only listened to her words on the balcony, but had understood the very essence of her being. It was also the most unnerving and strangely intimate gesture she had ever received. "A feather?" Lady Beatrice scoffed, peering over her niece's shoulder. "What an odd man. Still, it is from the Duke. You must pen a reply immediately." Victory did, her words chosen with the precision of a duelist. "Your Grace," she wrote, "I fear you mistake a raven for a songbird. One is a creature of the wild, the other destined for a cage, however lovely." This exchange marked the beginning of the Duke of Blackwood's campaign, a courtship so unconventional it set the Ton's gossips into a frenzy. There were no saccharine poems or public promenades in Hyde Park. Instead, his presence became a subtle, constant thread in the fabric of her days. A week later, while sketching in the quiet corner of a public gallery, Victory was startled by a deep voice at her elbow. "You have a remarkable eye for shadow, Miss Ainsworth." Alistair Beaumont stood beside her, his attention fixed on the charcoal drawing of a windswept tree she was rendering. He made no move to bow over her hand or offer pleasantries, instead engaging her as an equal. "Most artists focus on the light. You seem to understand that it is the darkness that gives a thing its shape." They spoke for nearly an hour, not of the weather or society, but of art, of Turner's tempestuous seas and Constable's tranquil landscapes. Victory found herself forgetting who he was, drawn in by a keen intelligence and a dry wit that was as sharp as it was unexpected. He listened, truly listened, a courtesy few men had ever afforded her. When he left, he did so without fanfare, leaving her both flustered and intellectually stimulated. His gifts continued in the same vein. A rare book of poetry by a little-known female author, a collection of pressed wildflowers from the remote Cornish coast. Each was a silent acknowledgement of the woman he perceived her to be, not the debutante she was supposed to be. Meanwhile, her secret meetings with Thomas Finch grew more fraught with tension. They met in the back rooms of his cramped studio, the air thick with the smell of turpentine and linseed oil. Thomas, with his gentle eyes and passionate heart, represented a life of authentic expression, a world away from the stifling drawing rooms of the aristocracy. "They say the Duke of Blackwood is courting you," he said one afternoon, his voice tight with a jealousy he tried to conceal. He was working on a portrait of her, a piece he called The Reluctant Princess, capturing the conflict in her stormy eyes. "He sends me oddities," Victory deflected, trying to sound dismissive. "Feathers and weeds. It is hardly a courtship. But he seeks you out. He speaks to you. Victory, people are talking. A man like that, he does not play games. He takes what he wants." "He cannot have me," she insisted, her voice fiercer than she intended. "My heart is here, with you." She believed it with every fiber of her being, yet she could not deny the pull of the Duke's formidable intellect, the unsettling way he seemed to understand her very soul. He was a puzzle she found herself increasingly compelled to solve. The Duke's pursuit culminated at the highly anticipated Queen Charlotte's Ball, the pinnacle of the London season. Victory, dressed in a gown of deep emerald silk that defied the debutante's traditional white, had been fending off advances all evening. She saw him the moment he entered, a commanding presence that made the Prince of Wales himself seem diminished. He moved through the glittering assembly with purpose, his golden eyes fixed on her. He did not ask for a dance. He simply appeared at her side and said, in a low voice meant only for her, "Walk with me." It was a command, not a request. Lady Beatrice looked as if she might faint from either horror or delight. Whispers erupted like wildfire. To be singled out so publicly by the Duke of Blackwood was tantamount to a declaration. Victory knew she should refuse, that every step she took with this man was a step away from Thomas and the life she craved. But she went. He led her not to the gardens, but to the quieter, less frequented art gallery of the mansion. Away from the prying eyes of the town, surrounded by the silent, painted faces of ancestors, the air between them crackled with an unspoken intensity. "You received my gifts," he stated, his gaze unwavering. "I did, Your Grace. They were unusual. I am not a usual man, Miss Ainsworth, and you are not a usual woman. I have no interest in the simpering pleasantries that pass for courtship in this city." He gestured to the room around them. "This is a marketplace. Young women paraded and priced like fillies at Tattersall's. You are worth more than that." His words struck a chord deep within her, echoing her own frustrated thoughts. "And what do you want from me, Your Grace?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He stepped closer, and for the first time, she saw something beyond the cool control in his eyes. It was a flicker of profound loneliness, a hint of the haunted man beneath the ducal title. "I want conversation that is not scripted," he said, his voice a low, intense murmur. "I want a mind that challenges my own. I want a woman who is not afraid of the shadows." He reached out, his fingers gently brushing a stray curl from her cheek. The touch was electric, a searing brand against her skin. "I want you, Victory." The raw, unvarnished honesty of his declaration stole the air from her lungs. It was not a flowery profession of love, but a statement of stark, undeniable fact. It was terrifying, and a small, treacherous part of her found it utterly thrilling. The Duke's public walk with Victory at the Queen Charlotte's Ball had the predictable effect. Society was scandalized and utterly enthralled. The Ainsworths' previously modest townhouse was suddenly inundated with invitations from hostesses who had barely acknowledged their existence before. Lady Beatrice was in a state of perpetual ecstasy, already planning wedding trousseaux in her mind. For Victory, it felt as if the bars of her gilded cage were closing in, the space to breathe growing smaller with each passing day. She tried to cling to the image of Thomas Finch, to the life of artistic freedom he represented. But even her memories of him seemed to fade like watercolors in the rain when compared to the stark, vivid presence of the Duke. Alistair Beaumont was not a man one could easily dismiss. A few days after the ball, a crisis erupted. Victory's father, a quiet country gentleman with a disastrous habit of making poor investments, had fallen into ruinous debt. The news arrived via a frantic letter from her mother, detailing the threat of bailiffs and the potential loss of their ancestral home. Lady Beatrice, upon hearing the news, collapsed into a fit of hysterics. Their social standing, their very survival, was hanging by a thread. That evening, as Victory sat in the drawing room staring blindly at a book, the butler announced an unexpected visitor. The Duke of Blackwood. He was shown in, his formidable presence seeming to shrink the already cluttered room. He dispensed with the usual pleasantries, his golden eyes immediately finding the distress in hers. "You are troubled, Miss Ainsworth," he stated simply. Victory, weary of pretense, did not deny it. "My family is facing financial difficulties, Your Grace." "I am aware," he said. He gestured for her to sit, taking the chair opposite her, creating an island of intimacy in the tense silence of the house. "I have taken the liberty of speaking with your father's creditors. The debts have been settled." Victory stared at him, speechless. The sheer arrogance of it, the casual way he wielded his immense wealth to interfere in her life, was breathtaking. "You had no right." "Perhaps not," he conceded, his expression unreadable. "But I will not stand by and watch the woman I intend to marry be brought low by something as trivial as commerce." "The woman you intend to marry?" she repeated, her voice laced with ice. "I have given you no indication that I would ever accept such a proposal." "Haven't you?" he countered, leaning forward slightly. "You meet my gaze when others look away. You challenge my words when others simper. You have not dismissed me, Miss Ainsworth, not truly. You are as intrigued by me as I am by you." His perception was so accurate, it felt like a violation. He saw the flicker of interest she tried so desperately to conceal. He saw her secret curiosity about the darkness that clung to him. "You know nothing about me," she whispered, a last, desperate defense. "I know you feel trapped. I know you dream of a world beyond this one. I know you have a lover," he said, the words dropping into the silence like stones. Victory's blood ran cold. "How?" "I am the Duke of Blackwood," he said, a hint of steel in his voice. "I make it my business to know things. This artist, Mr. Finch, he cannot give you the life you think you want. His world is one of poverty and struggle. He would see your spirit crushed by hardship, your beauty faded by want. He can offer you a fantasy. I can offer you the world." "You offer me a cage," she shot back, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and fury. "A larger, more opulent cage, but a cage nonetheless." For the first time, a shadow of genuine pain crossed his features. He rose and walked to the window, staring out at the darkening London street. "My life has been a cage of my own, Miss Ainsworth, one of titles, duties, and ghosts. I have no wish to imprison you. I wish for a partner, an equal, someone to share the darkness with, so that we might both find some light." He turned back to face her, and the raw vulnerability in his eyes silenced her retort. This was not the arrogant Duke, the beast of Blackwood. This was Alistair Beaumont, a man haunted by a past she couldn't begin to fathom. "There was a fire at Blackwood Manor many years ago," he said, his voice low and strained. "My parents, they died. The official report called it a tragic accident. Society, in its infinite cruelty, prefers to whisper that I was responsible, that the beast had a hand in their deaths." Victory was stunned into silence. She had heard the rumors, of course, but had dismissed them as malicious gossip. To hear him speak of it, to see the profound grief etched on his face, was to understand the source of his isolation. "I have spent 15 years as a prisoner of that night," he continued. "I have held the world at arm's length because I believed myself to be tainted. But when I look at you, I feel a desire to break free from that prison. Do not mistake my intentions, Miss Ainsworth. I am not a gentleman. I am possessive, and I am accustomed to getting what I want. But what I want is not your submission. It is your fire. It is your strength." He left her then, alone in the silent drawing room, her world tilted on its axis. He had paid her family's debts, exposed her secret love, and laid bare the deepest wound of his own soul. He had shown her a glimpse of the man behind the title, a man of immense complexity and profound sorrow. For the first time, Victory Ainsworth began to wonder if the freedom she so desperately craved might not be found in the arms of a poor artist, but beside a dark duke who understood, better than anyone, what it truly meant to be a prisoner. The Duke's confession hung in the air between them long after he had departed, a ghostly presence in the Ainsworth drawing room. Victory felt as though the carefully constructed walls of her world had been breached, leaving her exposed and uncertain. The knowledge of her family's rescue, bought at the Duke's hand, was a heavy gilded chain around her neck. She was indebted to him, and Alistair Beaumont did not strike her as a man who forgave debts lightly. Her next meeting with Thomas Finch was strained. The garret studio, which had once felt like a bohemian sanctuary, now seemed small and squalid. The smell of turpentine, once the scent of freedom, now tickled her nose with the cloying aroma of poverty. Thomas was ecstatic, having just sold a small landscape to a minor collector. "It is only 5 guineas, my love," he said, his eyes shining. "But it is a start. Soon I will have enough. We can go away from this wretched city, find a cottage by the sea. You will not have to endure another season." Victory looked at his earnest, hopeful face and felt a pang of guilt so sharp it was like a physical blow. His dream was so simple, so pure, but now measured against the Duke's stark reality, it felt fragile, almost childish. 5 guineas. The Duke had erased a debt that would have taken Thomas 1,000 lifetimes to earn with a mere flick of his wrist. "That is wonderful news, Thomas," she said, forcing a smile that felt brittle. He sensed her distance. "What is it, Victory? You seem a world away. Is it the Duke? Has he been bothering you?" "He has made his intentions clear," she admitted, unable to meet his gaze. "And what were your intentions in return?" he pressed, his artist's sensitivity detecting the subtle shift in her demeanor. "My intentions have not changed," she insisted, more to convince herself than him. But a seed of doubt had been planted. The Duke's words about her spirit being crushed by hardship echoed in her mind. Would her love for Thomas be enough to sustain her when faced with a life of constant struggle? Was her desire for freedom truly a desire for poverty? The crisis came to a head a week later. Victory received an urgent, almost incoherent note from Thomas, begging her to meet him at a small, disreputable tavern near the docks. She went, her heart pounding with a nameless dread, a heavy veil drawn over her face to conceal her identity. She found him in a dark corner, his face pale and bruised, his artist's hands trembling. "Thomas, what happened?" she cried, rushing to his side. "It was Lord Harrington," he stammered, his voice thick with shame. "He and his friends, they found me leaving the studio. They knew about us." Lord Marcus Harrington was a notorious rake and a known rival of the Duke of Blackwood. He was a man who took pleasure in the cruelty of others. "They said a penniless painter had no right to associate with the Duke's intended," Thomas continued, his voice breaking. They held me down. They broke my fingers, Victory, my painting hand." He held up his right hand, swollen and unnaturally bent. A wave of nausea washed over Victory. They hadn't just beaten him. They had tried to destroy him, to take away the one thing that gave his life meaning. It was a message, cruel and clear, and it was meant for her. This was the world she was defying, a world where powerful men used brutes like Harrington to enforce their will. Shaking with rage and despair, Victory returned home, her mind a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. The freedom she had dreamed of with Thomas was an illusion. The society she loathed would never let them be. They would be hounded, persecuted, and ultimately broken. She was in her room staring at her own pale reflection in the mirror when the Duke of Blackwood was announced. This time she knew why he had come. She met him in the formal parlor, her back straight, her expression a mask of cold fury. He did not waste time on preliminaries. He stood before her, his powerful frame radiating an aura of absolute control. "Miss Ainsworth, I have come to ask for your hand in marriage." It was not a romantic entreaty. His voice was flat, his eyes hard. This was a strategic maneuver, the final move in a game she hadn't even realized they were playing. "And if I refuse," she asked, her voice dangerously quiet, "then Lord Harrington's friends will likely pay Mr. Finch another visit. Perhaps this time they will not be so restrained, and the Ainsworth family name will find itself once again dragged through the mud of the bankruptcy courts. Your father's reputation would not survive a second scandal." The threat was unspoken but hung in the air between them, as sharp and deadly as a guillotine's blade. He would protect her whether she wanted it or not, but his protection came at a price. "This is not a proposal," she seethed. "It is blackmail." It is a reality, he countered, his voice unyielding. You wished for freedom. I am offering it to you. Marry me, and you will be the Duchess of Blackwood. You will be untouchable. No one will dare to harm you or your family ever again. You will have wealth and power beyond your wildest imaginings. You will be free from the constraints of this pathetic society because you will be above it. He took a step closer, his golden eyes boring into hers. I will not pretend this is a love match, not yet, but I will offer you my respect, my protection, and my fidelity. I will give you a life of substance, not one of scraping by on 5 guinea hopes. In return, I ask for one thing, your loyalty. Be my Duchess. Stand with me against the ghosts of my past and the jackals of the present. He held out his hand. It was not a plea, but a demand. A choice between 2 prisons. A life of poverty and fear with the man she loved, or a life of unimaginable power and privilege with the man who sought to possess her. She looked at his outstretched hand, then at her own reflection in the polished surface of the grand piano. She saw the defiant girl she had been and the terrified woman she was becoming. She thought of Thomas's broken fingers, of her parents' despair. The Duke was right. Freedom was not free. It was purchased with sacrifice. With a heart as heavy as lead and eyes that burned with unshed tears, Victory Ainsworth placed her hand in his. I accept your grace, she said, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. The beast had her now. She had made her bargain. The announcement of the engagement between His Grace, the Duke of Blackwood, and Miss Victory Ainsworth sent shockwaves through the aristocracy. It was the topic of every dinner party, the subject of every whispered conversation behind fluttering fans. The reclusive, haunted Duke, the beast of Blackwood, had finally chosen a bride. And he had chosen not one of the great beauties from a titled family, but the fiery, unconventional Miss Ainsworth. The ton was agog with speculation, envy, and a healthy dose of malicious glee, certain that the spirited young woman was destined for a miserable, isolated life. For Victory, the days following her acceptance were a blur of suffocating preparations. Her life was no longer her own. Dressmakers, jewelers, and solicitors paraded through the Ainsworth home, their presence a constant reminder of the bargain she had struck. The Duke was generous to a fault, showering her and her family with gifts that were as magnificent as they were impersonal. A diamond necklace that felt as heavy as a yoke, deeds to properties she had no desire to own, a carriage upholstered in velvet, the color of dried blood. Lady Beatrice was in heaven, chattering endlessly about crests and titles, oblivious to the despair in her niece's eyes. The most difficult task lay before her, telling Thomas. She owed him the truth, a clean break, however painful. She sent a note, requesting to meet him one last time at his studio. The air in the small room was stale with the scent of old paint and shattered dreams. Thomas sat by the window, his broken hand wrapped in clean bandages, a gift of medical care secretly paid for by the Duke, a fact Victory knew but could never reveal. His portrait of her, the reluctant princess, stood on the easel, her painted eyes seeming to mock her with their captured defiance. It's true then, he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. You are to marry him. I have no choice, Thomas, she whispered, her own voice cracking. There are circumstances you do not understand. My family. Your family? He scoffed, a bitter, unfamiliar sound. Or is it that you have finally succumbed to the allure of a title? Did the diamonds finally outshine my humble affections? That is not fair, she cried, stung by the injustice of his words. Do you think this is what I want? To be shackled to a man I do not love? A man they call a monster? They say he is a monster, Thomas countered, rising to his feet. But he is a monster who has won. He has bought you, Victory, and you have allowed yourself to be sold. His words were cruel, born of a broken heart and a broken hand, but they struck their intended mark. In his eyes, she was no longer the fierce, independent woman he had loved, but just another member of the aristocracy she had so despised, trading her heart for security. I loved you, he said, his voice softening into a raw whisper of pain. I would have given you a life of truth, of beauty. It may not have been easy, but it would have been real. And I loved you, she replied, tears finally streaming down her face, But love is not enough to protect you from the cruelty of this world. It could not protect your hand. It could not save my family. She reached into her reticule and pulled out a small, heavy purse. This is for you. Go to Italy, study with the masters. Forget me. It was the Duke's money, of course, a sum that would ensure Thomas's comfort and success for years to come. It was blood money, the price of her freedom from him. He looked at the purse as if it were a venomous snake. I do not want his money. Take it, she pleaded. Do not let them have destroyed you for nothing. Please, Thomas, if you ever love me, take it and build the life we could not have. He hesitated, his pride warring with the practical reality of his situation. Finally, with a look of utter defeat, he took the purse. Their fingers brushed one last time, a cold and final touch. Goodbye, Victory, he said, turning away from her to stare at the portrait. I hope you find your freedom in that gilded cage. Victory fled the studio, her heart shattered into a million pieces. She had done the right thing, the only thing she could do. She had saved her family and secured Thomas's future. But in doing so, she had sacrificed her own heart. She returned home to find the Duke waiting for her. He stood by the fireplace, his expression unreadable, though his eyes seemed to notice the tear tracks on her cheeks. It is done, she said, her voice hollow. He simply nodded. The carriage is waiting. We leave for Blackwood Manor in the morning. There was no sympathy in his voice, no offer of comfort. This was a transaction, and her part of the bargain was just beginning. As she looked at the impassive, formidable man who was to be her husband, a chilling realization washed over her. She had said goodbye to the man she loved to become the Duchess of Blackwood. She was now his property, and she was about to be taken to his lair, a remote haunted castle by the sea, a place from which she might never truly escape. The price of becoming a duchess, she was beginning to understand, was everything. The journey from London to the Cornish coast was a journey into another world. The manicured parks and bustling, gaslit streets of the city gave way to rolling green hills, then to the wild, untamed beauty of the countryside. They traveled in the Duke's private carriage, a vehicle of exquisite craftsmanship, sprung so perfectly that the ride was as smooth as sailing on a calm sea. It was, however, a deeply silent journey. Victory sat opposite the Duke, the rich leather upholstery a vast unspoken territory between them. He did not attempt small talk, for which she was grateful. Instead, he read, his attention fully absorbed in a leather-bound volume of what looked to be ancient philosophy. He seemed entirely self-contained, a man who required nothing from the world or from her. She, in turn, watched the landscape change through the window, her thoughts as turbulent as the gray clouds gathering on the horizon. She was leaving behind everything she had ever known, the city, her family, the ghost of her love for Thomas. She was traveling toward a future that was a terrifying blank canvas, dominated by the severe, silent man sitting across from her. Who was Alistair Beaumont, really? Was he the perceptive intellectual who discussed art with her in a quiet gallery? The haunted man who spoke of his parents' tragic deaths? Or the ruthless predator who had blackmailed her into marriage? She suspected he was all three, a man of dangerous and warring contradictions. As they journeyed further west, the landscape grew more dramatic, more primal. The gentle fields were replaced by rugged moorland, dotted with granite outcroppings and windswept trees that grew bent and crooked, as if in perpetual deference to the power of the sea. The air grew cooler, tinged with the sharp, briny scent of salt. This was his land, his duchy. It was a land that seemed to reflect the man himself, stark, beautiful, and steeped in a profound and ancient melancholy. Late on the second day, they crested a hill, and Victory drew in a sharp breath. There in the distance, perched on a jagged cliff overlooking the churning Atlantic, was Blackwood Manor. It was not a house, it was a fortress, built of dark, local granite that seemed to absorb the fading light. It rose from the rock as if it were an extension of the cliff itself. Towers and turrets clawed at the sky, and mullioned windows stared out at the sea like vacant, watching eyes. A single winding road carved into the cliff face was the only visible approach. The sea crashed against the rocks below, sending plumes of white spray high into the air, the sound a constant, mournful roar. It was the most magnificent and terrifying place she had ever seen. A perfect home for a beast, a perfect prison. As the carriage rumbled across a stone bridge and through a massive wrought iron gate, a sense of foreboding settled over Victory, cold and heavy as a shroud. The grounds were not manicured lawns, but wild, overgrown gardens filled with dark yew trees and rhododendron bushes that had grown into monstrous shapes. The stories she had heard in London, of ghosts, of tragedy, of a duke driven mad by grief, seemed to cling to the very stones of the place. The carriage drew to a halt before a set of enormous oak doors, which swung open as if by an unseen hand. A line of servants stood waiting in the cavernous entrance hall, their faces pale and impassive. At their head was a woman in a severe black dress, her gray hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to pull her skin, taut over her sharp cheekbones. Her eyes were dark and intelligent, missing nothing. "Your Grace," she said, her voice crisp and emotionless as she curtsied. "Welcome home." "Mrs. Gable," the Duke acknowledged with a slight nod. "This is Miss Ainsworth, my fiancée. You will see to her needs." Mrs. Gable's gaze fell upon Victory, and for a fleeting moment, Victory saw a flicker of something in the older woman's eyes. Pity, perhaps, or a warning. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a mask of professional deference. "Miss Ainsworth," the housekeeper said, her tone respectful but cold. "If you will follow me, I will show you to your rooms." The Duke did not move to accompany them. "I have business in my study," he said, already turning away. "We will dine at 8. And with that, he was gone, disappearing down a long, shadowy corridor, leaving Victory alone with the formidable Mrs. Gable and the silent, watching servants. She was a guest, a fiancée, the future Duchess of Blackwood, yet she felt like an intruder, a stranger in a strange and hostile land. As Mrs. Gable led her up a grand, sweeping staircase, its dark wood absorbing all light, Victory felt the oppressive weight of the house settle upon her. The air was cold, thick with the scent of beeswax, old stone, and something else, something akin to sorrow. Portraits of the Duke's ancestors lined the walls, their painted eyes following her every move, their expressions stern and disapproving. They were the ghosts of Blackwood, and she was the interloper who dared to tread in their halls. Her rooms, when they reached them, were vast and opulent, with a large four-poster bed draped in heavy velvet curtains and a stone fireplace large enough to stand in. But the grandeur was cold, impersonal. The most prominent feature was a set of tall, arched windows that looked directly out onto the raging sea. There were no bars on the windows, but Victory knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that she was a prisoner here as surely as if she were in the Tower of London. The days at Blackwood Manor bled into one another, each one marked by the same oppressive routine and profound isolation. Victory was the lady of the manor in name only. The household ran with a silent, unnerving efficiency under the iron rule of Mrs. Gable, who seemed to anticipate Victory's needs before she was aware of them herself, yet offered no warmth or companionship. The other servants were like ghosts, flitting through the cavernous rooms, their eyes always downcast, their mouths set in grim, tight lines. The Duke remained a distant, enigmatic figure. They dined together each evening in a grand, echoing dining hall, the long, polished table a chasm between them. Their conversations were stilted, formal affairs, touching on literature, politics, or the history of the estate. He was intelligent, often insightful, but he kept his inner world locked away. After dinner, he would retreat to his study, a wing of the manor she was implicitly forbidden to enter, and she would be left to the silent, cavernous company of the house. Driven by a mixture of boredom and a desperate need to understand the place that was to be her home, Victory began to explore. Blackwood Manor was a labyrinth of endless corridors, forgotten drawing rooms draped in dusty white sheets, and winding servants' staircases. It was a house of secrets, and Victory could feel them whispering from the very walls. There were rooms that were kept locked, most notably the entire East Wing, which, according to a tight-lipped maid, had been the late Duke and Duchess's private apartments. When Victory questioned Mrs. Gable about it, the housekeeper's face became a stony mask. "His Grace prefers that wing to remain undisturbed," she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. "It has been sealed since the fire." The fire, it was the central, unspoken tragedy of the house. No one would speak of it, yet its memory was a palpable presence, a stain of smoke and sorrow that time could not erase. One rainy afternoon, seeking refuge in the manor's vast, neglected library, Victory stumbled upon a hidden alcove behind a row of Gothic novels. There, tucked away on a dusty shelf, she found a small, leather-bound diary. The handwriting inside was delicate, feminine. It was the diary of Alistair's mother, the late Duchess Isabella Beaumont. With trembling fingers, Victory began to read. The early entries were filled with the breathless joy of a young bride. Her love for her husband, the Duke Alaric, and her adoration for her young son, Alistair. She wrote of balls and parties, of the beauty of the Cornish coast, of a life filled with light and laughter. But as the years passed, a shadow began to fall across the pages. The Duchess wrote of her husband's changing moods, his growing obsession with the Beaumont lineage, and the immense pressure of the ducal title. She described his dark humors, his long, unexplained absences, and his increasingly volatile temper. On April 12, 1873, she wrote, "Alaric was furious today. A tenant farmer was late with his rent, and my husband spoke of eviction with such coldness. This is not the man I married. The darkness in him grows, a storm gathering on the horizon. He frightens me sometimes. He spends hours in his study with those old ledgers, tracing the Beaumont bloodline back for centuries, as if searching for some answer, or perhaps an excuse. Little Alistair sees it too. The boy is too perceptive. He watches his father with old, worried eyes." Victory felt a chill that had nothing to do with the drafty library. She was reading a private history of a family's descent into tragedy. The diary painted a portrait not of a happy, loving couple, but of a woman living in fear, and a boy forced to witness his father's decline. Her explorations took on a new urgency. She was no longer just a curious prisoner. She was an investigator, determined to uncover the truth that the Duke himself refused to speak of. She began to observe the servants more closely, catching snippets of whispered conversations in the kitchens, a fearful glance exchanged between maids when the Duke's bell rang. She found her most unlikely source of information in the headgroom, an old, weather-beaten man named Silas Croft, who had served the Beaumont family his entire life. She found him in the stables, his gnarled hands gently brushing down a magnificent black stallion that was the Duke's personal mount. "He has his father's way with horses," Silas said, his voice a low Cornish burr, as Victory offered the stallion a sugar cube. "And his father's temper when roused." Emboldened by his conversational tone, Victory asked, "You knew the late Duke well?" Silas stopped his work, his eyes clouding with memory. "I did, miss. Knew him from a boy. He was a man of great passions. He loved the Duchess something fierce, but he was a proud man, a hard man. The title, it weighed on him. He felt the eyes of all his ancestors on his shoulders." "What happened, Silas?" Victory asked, her voice soft. "The night of the fire." The old groom shook his head, a look of profound sadness on his face. "'Tweren't right. The whispers in London about the young master, they're poison. Master Alistair loved his mother more than life itself. He was just a boy, 15 years old. What he saw that night, it would break a man, let alone a lad." He looked around nervously, as if the stable walls had ears. "It's not my place to say more, miss. Some doors are best left locked." His words only deepened the mystery. What had Alistair seen? What horror had transpired in the East Wing that was so terrible it had to be sealed away, both physically and emotionally? That night, as a storm raged outside, lashing the manor with wind and rain, Victory was jolted from a restless sleep by a sound. It was a faint, mournful cry, seemingly coming from within the house, almost lost in the howl of the wind. It sounded like a woman weeping. Her heart pounding, Victory slipped out of bed, lit a candle, and crept into the silent, dark corridor. The sound was clearer now, leading her, as she had known it would, toward the forbidden East Wing. The heavy oak door was bolted, a silent sentinel guarding its secrets. But the sound, the heartbreaking sound of a woman's grief, seemed to seep through the very wood, a ghostly echo of a tragedy that refused to be forgotten. The walls of Blackwood were whispering, and Victory was beginning to understand their terrible story. The ghostly weeping Victory heard during the storm became an obsession. It was not repeated, but the memory of it, so full of despair, haunted her waking hours. She felt the truth of Blackwood Manor lay behind the locked door of the East Wing, a truth Alistair was either unable or unwilling to confront. Her position as his fiancée, his future duchess, felt like a sham as long as this great, unspoken secret lay between them. She decided she could no longer be a passive prisoner. She had to act. Her chance came unexpectedly. The Duke was called away on urgent ducal business to a neighboring estate, a trip that would keep him away overnight. It was the first time she had been left entirely alone in the manor, save for the ever-watchful Mrs. Gable and the spectral servants. A strange sense of liberation, tinged with nervous anticipation, filled her. That evening, after a solitary dinner, she approached the housekeeper in the main hall. Victory had spent weeks observing the woman, noting the large ornate ring of keys that never left her possession. "Mrs. Gable," Victory began, her tone polite but firm, adopting an air of authority she did not feel. "I find I am unable to sleep. I wish to sit in the late Duchess's private chapel. I am told it is in the East Wing. Please unbolt the door for me." Mrs. Gable's impassive facade finally cracked. A look of genuine alarm crossed her features. "Miss, I cannot. His Grace gave me strict instructions." "His Grace is not here," Victory interrupted, her gaze steady and unwavering. "And I am to be his wife, the next Duchess of Blackwood. This will be my house. I will not be a stranger to its history, nor will I be frightened of shadows. Open the door." It was a gamble, a direct challenge to the housekeeper's authority and her loyalty to the Duke. For a long moment, the two women stood in silent opposition. Victory could see the conflict in Mrs. Gable's eyes. Finally, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of years, the older woman gave a stiff nod. "As you wish, miss," she said, her voice heavy with resignation. She selected a large iron key from her ring and led Victory to the forbidden door. The bolt slid back with a loud groaning clang that echoed in the cavernous silence. As the door creaked open, it released a rush of stale, cold air, thick with the faint, lingering scent of smoke and decay. Mrs. Gable handed Victory a lit candelabra. "The chapel is at the end of the hall. I will wait for you here." Her expression was grim, as if she were sending Victory into a tomb. The East Wing was a place frozen in time. The opulent furnishings were draped in white sheets, ghostly shapes in the flickering candlelight. A thick layer of dust covered every surface, muffling her footsteps. But the evidence of the fire was everywhere. A long, dark scorch mark marred the silk wallpaper along one side of the corridor. The air grew colder, heavier as she moved deeper into the wing. She passed what must have been the Duchess's bedchamber, the door slightly ajar. Peeking inside, she saw a scene of heartbreaking disarray. A beautiful dressing gown lay discarded on a chair. A silver-backed brush sat on the vanity, as if its owner had just set it down. It was as if the occupants had vanished in an instant. At the end of the hall, she found the chapel. It was a small, intimate space with a simple stone altar and a few rows of wooden pews. A magnificent stained glass window depicted a scene of the Cornish coast, but it was cracked, a spiderweb of fractures distorting the beautiful image. This place, once a sanctuary, now felt desecrated. It was then that she saw it. Lying on the floor, half hidden beneath a pew, was a small silver object. She picked it up. It was a man's cufflink, intricately engraved with the crest of a noble family she did not recognize. But it was not the crest that made her blood run cold. It was the dark reddish-brown stain that marred its surface. Suddenly, a floorboard creaked behind her. Victory spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. A figure stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the darkness of the hall. "You should not be here." It was Alistair. He had returned early. His face, illuminated by the candlelight she held, was a mask of thunderous fury and profound pain. He looked not at her, but at the cufflink clutched in her hand. "What have you done?" he whispered, his voice hoarse with an emotion she couldn't name. "I wanted to understand," she said, her own voice trembling. "Alistair, I found your mother's diary. I know your father was not a well man." The use of his given name, the mention of the diary, seemed to break through his anger, leaving him raw and exposed. He strode into the chapel, his powerful frame seeming to overwhelm the small space. He ran a hand through his hair, his composure, for the first time, completely gone. "You don't understand anything," he said, his voice breaking. My father was consumed by pride, by the weight of our name. He became a monster. He was jealous, possessive. He suspected my mother of being unfaithful. He pointed a shaking finger toward the cracked window. That night, there was a guest, Lord Harrington. Harrington? Victory gasped. Marcus Harrington's father? The very same, Alistair confirmed, a bitter twist to his lips. He and my mother were old friends. My father, in his madness, saw more than friendship. He confronted them. Here, in this chapel. The pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place with sickening clarity. The cuff link, the weeping she had heard, a psychic echo of a mother's terror. I was in my room, Alistair continued, his voice dropping to a near inaudible whisper, his eyes staring at a past only he could see. I heard them shouting. I ran here. I saw my father, his face contorted with rage. He had a pistol. Harrington was trying to reason with him. My mother was screaming. He choked on the words, the memory of fresh and agonizing wound. He pushed her. She fell. Her head struck the corner of the altar. There was so much blood. Harrington lunged for my father and the pistol went off. The shot went wide, shattering the window. In the struggle, a candelabra was knocked over. The draperies. They went up in flames almost instantly. He finally looked at Victory, his golden eyes swimming with the unshed tears of a 15-year-old boy. My father, he didn't try to help her. He just stood there staring at what he had done. As the room filled with smoke, Harrington dragged me out. He saved my life. But my father, he stayed. He let the fire consume him and my mother's body. He chose to die with his sins. The official story, a tragic accident, was a lie concocted to protect the proud Beaumont name. Harrington's father, to spare his own family from scandal, had agreed to the cover-up. And Alistair, a boy of 15, had been forced to carry the terrible weight of that secret, allowing the world to whisper that he was a monster rather than reveal the truth, that his father was the true beast of Blackwood. The confession, ripped from the very depths of Alistair's soul, hung in the cold, still air of the chapel. Victory stared at him, seeing for the first time the full extent of the burden he had carried for 15 years. He was not a monster. He was a survivor, a boy who had been forced to become a man in a single horrific night of fire and death. Her heart, which she had so carefully guarded, broke for him. Why, she whispered, taking a hesitant step toward him. Why let the world believe you were to blame? To protect the name, as he answered, the words tasting like poison. It was all my father cared about. It was all our world cares about. The truth would have destroyed the Beaumont legacy forever. Lord Harrington convinced me that silence was the only way. A tragic fire was better than a scandalous murder-suicide. Before Victory could respond, the sound of a carriage arriving on the gravel drive below cut through the silence. A moment later, Mrs. Gable appeared at the chapel door, her face pale with alarm. Your Grace, she said, her voice trembling slightly, you have a visitor. It is Lord Harrington. Alistair's head snapped up, his grief instantly replaced by a cold, dangerous fury. Marcus Harrington? Here? He insisted on seeing you, Your Grace. He said it was a matter of historical importance. Alistair's eyes met Victory's, and in them she saw a dawning, terrible understanding. This was not a coincidence. Harrington's arrival, on this night of all nights, was a calculated move. He know, Alistair said, his voice a low growl. He must have known you would come in here. He has been waiting for the opportune moment to strike. What does he want? Victory asked, a cold dread seeping into her bones. His family has fallen on hard times. He has been trying to blackmail me for months, threatening to reveal the truth of that night. Not the real truth, but a twisted version where I am the villain. I have refused him. Now he has come to force my hand. He looked at Victory, his expression grim. He will use you. He will threaten you to get to me. He strode out of the chapel, Victory close behind him. Stay in your rooms and lock the door, he commanded. No, she said, her voice ringing with a strength she didn't know she possessed. You said you wanted a partner, a duchess to stand with you against the jackals. The jackal is at the door. I will not hide. For a moment he looked at her, a flicker of surprise and admiration in his eyes. He gave a single sharp nod. Very well, but stay behind me. They descended the grand staircase to find Lord Marcus Harrington standing in the entrance hall, a smug, predatory smile on his handsome face. He was the very picture of aristocratic dissipation, his fine clothes unable to hide the cruelty in his eyes. "Blackwood," he said, his tone oozing false cordiality. "Forgive the late hour. I was just regaling your lovely fiancé's former suitor, Mr. Finch, with tales of my father's heroic actions on the night of the Great Fire. It occurred to me that the full story has never been properly told." The threat was clear. He would go to Thomas, to the press, to anyone who would listen, and paint Alistair as a murderer. "You are not welcome in this house, Harrington," Alistair said, his voice dangerously calm. "Oh, I think I am," Harrington sneered, his eyes flicking to Victory. "You see, I have come to collect a debt. My father saved your life and your precious family name, a service for which he was never adequately compensated. I, however, am not so patient. I require £50,000. A pittance for you, I'm sure. A lifeline for me." "I will not give you a single shilling," Alistair retorted. Harrington's smile widened. "A poor choice. Perhaps your beautiful bride-to-be can persuade you. A scandal of this magnitude just before the wedding? It would be devastating. The beast of Blackwood, exposed as a patricide. Society would crucify you. And her." He took a menacing step toward Victory. In that instant, something inside Alistair snapped. With a roar of pure primal rage, he launched himself at Harrington. The two men crashed against the wall, the sounds of their struggle echoing through the cavernous hall. It was not a gentleman's duel. It was a brutal, desperate fight. Harrington was younger, but Alistair was fueled by 15 years of suppressed grief and fury. Victory screamed as Harrington produced a small, silver-plated derringer from his coat pocket. The servants, who had gathered at the edges of the hall, gasped in terror. "Alistair!" she cried, her warning coming a second too late. The gun went off, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. Alistair cried out, stumbling back, clutching his arm. Blood, dark and stark, bloomed on the sleeve of his white shirt. Harrington, his face a mask of triumph, raised the pistol again, aiming it squarely at Alistair's chest. But before he could fire, Victory acted. Her mind, strangely clear amidst the chaos, remembered the heavy, iron poker resting by the grand fireplace. She seized it, its weight unfamiliar, but reassuring in her hands. With a cry of defiance, she ran toward Harrington and swung the poker with all her might, striking his gun hand. The pistol clattered to the marble floor. Harrington howled in pain and rage, turning on her, his face contorted in a vicious snarl. He grabbed her, his fingers digging into her arms like talons. "You little fool," he hissed, his face inches from hers. "You've just signed your Duke's death warrant." But Alistair, though wounded, was not defeated. Ignoring the pain in his arm, he charged again, tackling Harrington and sending them both crashing to the floor. The fight was over in seconds. Alistair, his eyes blazing with a cold, controlled fury, subdued his rival, his hands like iron clamps. The head groom, Silas, and two footmen rushed forward to haul the struggling, cursing Harrington to his feet. "Take him to the cellars," Alistair commanded, his voice ragged but full of authority. "He will be handed over to the magistrate in the morning on charges of attempted murder." As Harrington was dragged away shouting threats and obscenities, a sudden silence descended on the hall. Victory rushed to Alistair's side, her eyes fixed on the blood soaking his sleeve. "You're hurt," she whispered, her hands fluttering uselessly around the wound. He looked down at his arm, then back at her, his golden eyes searching her face. He saw not fear, but a fierce, protective strength. He reached out with his uninjured hand and gently touched her cheek, his thumb brushing away a smudge of soot. "The walls of this house have seen enough tragedy," he said, his voice soft and full of a new, unfamiliar emotion. "Tonight, you refuse to let them claim another." In that moment, standing amidst the echoes of violence, with the scent of gunpowder in the air, the last of the walls between them crumbled into dust. She was not his prisoner. She was his partner, his defender. She was his Duchess. And for the first time, Victory Ainsworth looked at the Duke of Blackwood and felt not fear, but a powerful, undeniable, and terrifying love. The aftermath of Harrington's attack left an indelible mark on Blackwood Manor. The immediate chaos gave way to a quiet, charged intimacy that neither Victory nor Alistair had anticipated. The magistrate was summoned from the nearby village, and Lord Harrington was taken away, his threats and protests fading into the Cornish mist. The scandal was contained, reduced to a simple matter of a trespasser and an assault, the deeper, darker history remaining buried under the weight of ducal power. Victory, with the help of a flustered but capable Mrs. Gable, insisted on tending to Alistair's wound herself. In the quiet solitude of his private study, a room she now entered not as an intruder, but as a welcome presence, she carefully cleaned and bandaged the gash on his arm. The bullet had only grazed him, a lucky shot in a chaotic struggle, but the injury served as a stark, physical reminder of the night's events. As she worked, her fingers gentle and sure, the silence between them was no longer oppressive, but filled with a new, profound understanding. The shared danger, the violent confrontation with the past, had forged a bond between them stronger than any marriage contract. "I have never had anyone fight for me before," Alistair said, his voice a low murmur as he watched her. "Not like that. You have spent your life protecting the ghosts of this house," Victory replied softly, tying off the bandage. "It seems only fair that someone should protect you." She finished her task and made to move away, but he caught her hand, his grip surprisingly gentle. "Stay," he said. It was not a command, but a plea. He led her to the two large armchairs that faced the fireplace, where a low fire now crackled, casting a warm, dancing light across the room. This study was the heart of his world, filled with books, maps, and the scent of old leather and wood smoke. It was a deeply personal space, and his invitation for her to share it was not lost on her. For hours they talked, or rather Alistair talked, and Victory listened. He spoke of his childhood, of the brilliant, laughing mother he had adored, and the proud, tormented father he had both loved and feared. He spoke of the suffocating loneliness that had followed the fire, the weight of the title, and the crushing burden of the secret he carried. He laid the scars of his soul bare for her to see, trusting her with the pain he had never shared with another living being. "I hid from the world," he confessed, staring into the flames. "I embraced the whispers, the name they gave me, the Beast of Blackwood. It was easier to be a monster than to be the boy who watched his parents die. The beast did not have to feel." "And now?" she asked, her voice gentle. He turned to look at her, and the warmth of the fire was reflected in his golden eyes. "And now, I find I no longer wish to be numb. You, Victory, you have woken me up. From the moment I saw you at that ball, so full of fire and defiance, you were a challenge to the gray world I had built around myself. I told myself I wanted to possess you, to own that strength. But I was wrong. I want to share it." He reached across the space between their chairs and took her hand again, lacing his fingers through hers. "The proposal I made in London, it was a transaction born of arrogance and desperation. I offer you a new one." He slid from his chair to kneel before her, a gesture of such profound humility from this proud, powerful man that it brought tears to her eyes. "Victory Ainsworth," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I am a flawed, damaged man, haunted by a past I cannot change. But I see in you a future I never dared to dream of, a future of light, of strength, of partnership. I am asking you not to be my duchess in title, but to be my wife in every sense of the word. I cannot offer you a simple life, but I can offer you all that I am and all that I have. I can offer you my heart if you will have it." The love she had felt for Thomas Finch was a sweet, gentle thing, a youthful dream of a life that never could have been. The emotion that swelled in her heart now was something else entirely. It was a fierce, powerful, all-consuming force, forged in darkness and tempered by truth. It was a love for the man in his entirety, the beast and the prince, the darkness and the light. With tears of her own tracing paths down her cheeks, she reached out and cupped his face in her hands. "Alistair Beaumont," she said, her voice clear and strong, "my answer is yes." He rose and drew her to her feet, his arms encircling her in an embrace that was both powerful and tender. He was no longer a stranger, no longer her captor. He was her partner, her equal, her love. As his lips met hers for the first time, It was not a kiss of possession, but of homecoming. The ghosts of Blackwood Manor were finally silent, and in their place, a new story, their story, was just beginning. The return to London was a world away from Victory's first journey with the Duke. They traveled not as a captor and his reluctant prize, but as true partners, the silence in the carriage now one of comfortable companionship, punctuated by shared glances, soft-spoken words, and the lingering touch of hands. Blackwood Manor, once a symbol of her imprisonment, now felt like a sanctuary they were leaving behind, a place where they had faced down their respective demons and found each other in the wreckage. Their arrival in the city created an even greater stir than their engagement announcement. The Ton, ever eager for a new drama, had been expecting to see a cowed, broken Miss Ainsworth, a wild bird finally caged by the fearsome Duke of Blackwood. Instead, they were met with a vision of breathtaking power. At their first official appearance, a grand opera performance at Covent Garden, Victory entered the Duke's box not on his arm, but at his side. She was dressed in a gown of deep crimson velvet, the color of courage and passion, the Blackwood diamonds at her throat, no longer a yoke, but a dazzling symbol of her new station. She did not hide behind her fiancé. She met the hundreds of prying eyes with a serene confidence that bespoke not submission, but command. She was not the Duke's possession. She was his Duchess. The whispers were immediate. Lady Beatrice, who had been preening with self-importance, was flummoxed by this new, formidable version of her niece. The gossips and rivals who had hoped for Victory's downfall were met with a united front that was both intimidating and utterly impenetrable. Alistair, who had always stood aloof from society, now engaged with it, but on his own terms. He was no longer the brooding recluse, but a man at ease, his attention and his quiet smiles reserved for one woman alone. They rewrote the rules of their world. Victory did not abandon her passions, she embraced them. With Alistair's full encouragement and financial backing, she established a fund to support struggling artists, with a particular focus on female painters who were so often overlooked by the establishment. Her first beneficiary was, of course, Thomas Finch, an anonymous endowment sent to his address in Florence that would allow him to study for years, free from financial worry. It was a final, kind closing of a chapter, an act of grace that Alistair fully supported. He in turn began to emerge from the shadows of his past. He opened the agricultural lands of his duchy to new, innovative farming techniques, improving the lives of his tenants. He took his seat in the House of Lords not as a silent, brooding presence, but as a passionate advocate for social reforms, his powerful voice commanding the attention of the nation's most influential men. Their home in London and the now transformed Blackwood Manor became centers of a new kind of society, one based not on empty titles and malicious gossip, but on intellect, art, and genuine conversation. They hosted salons where politicians debated with poets and scientists argued with artists. They were a power couple, their influence stemming not just from their title, but from their shared intelligence, respect, and a love that was visible in every interaction. One evening, months after their wedding, they stood on the same balcony at Bridgewater House where they had first truly spoken. Another grand ball was in full swing inside, but out here, the night was quiet, the sounds of the city a distant murmur. "A year ago," Victory mused, leaning back against him as he wrapped his arms around her waist, "I stood here and told you I valued freedom above all else. And I told you it was a commodity that must be purchased with sacrifice," he murmured into her hair. She turned in his arms to face him, her stormy gray eyes soft in the gaslight. "I thought freedom meant escaping this world. I thought it meant being alone, unburdened. I was wrong." She placed a hand over his heart. "Freedom isn't the absence of bonds. It is finding the one bond that sets you free." Alistair Beaumont, the Duke of Blackwood, looked at his wife, his Victory, and knew the truth of her words. He had been the most powerful, most sought-after man in London, a man who could have anything he wanted. But his greatest victory was not in possessing the one woman who didn't want him. It was in finally being worthy of the love of the one woman he could not live without. He had sought to capture her fire, and instead, she had used it to light up his world, chasing away the shadows for good. So ends the story of Victory and the Duke, a journey that began in the glittering ballrooms of London and found its heart in the haunted corridors of a lonely castle. It's a story that reminds us that the most formidable cages are often the ones we build within ourselves, and that true freedom is not about escaping our circumstances, but about finding the one person who gives us the courage to transform them. They were the woman who wanted nothing to do with a title, and the duke who was suffocated by his, yet together they found a love that was more powerful than any name and more liberating than any rebellion.